event that we have today. It's brought to you by Response, which has been developed by Wikifactory, as well as experts in the field of medical engineering, manufacturing, social impact design. This session is an opportunity to delve deeper in one of the key questions that arose. In this case, Show from Enable. We have John Gershenson from Kigenzi Roundtable today. So be sure to submit your answers. And we'll also be giving the chance to ask, we will be sharing up some of the key insights of these roundtables with the participants, the whole debate with our handle Wikifactory, as well as the hashtag #BioResponse, and about the business models and the funding opportunities that we can take advantage of, we can roll out. Has led a global network of volunteers to develop open source 3D printed prosthetics to those who need them. John, to be hearing of your experience and what you've been doing as well, especially for COVID-19.
Wonderful, but now I'm sounding a little hoarse. I want to salute you for what you're doing. I think this is a great thing, and I just wanted to point out that those are really two different things. And the critical thing is to fund your project. A little bit about what I've come to think of as Enable's secret non-business model, because we've managed to do a great deal without actually funding a business, almost without funding our project, which is to say funding is only a piece of the puzzle. Our recipe involves open source designs that are used by volunteers to produce freely donated devices, which are delivered with responsible end user guidance and disclaimers of liability. Now that 5-point recipe has allowed us to proceed basically without funding, to have minimal regulatory and liability burdens, and to reach precisely the people who established institutions, governments, businesses, and NGOs have failed to reach, the underserved. Governments, business, and NGOs are great, but they're not perfect. And therefore, where you find underserved populations is precisely where none of them reach. And a global network of volunteers, it turns out, can do things and help people that established businesses, established governments, established NGOs can't reach. So it's been very interesting thinking about how the Enable model may or may not be relevant to the current crisis, because the current crisis is really highlighting a number of things that I think we happen to be well positioned now to notice. So I have a little sermon. I know I've only got 5 minutes. I think I'm about halfway through it, on sharing and caring, right? In the open source business, we like to say that sharing is caring. And you'll notice that these elements, volunteers, open source, good documentation, disclaimers of liability, and giving it away for free are all very conducive to sharing and sharing of good stuff. With this model, actually, we have found we can lose money on every sale, but we can still make it up in volume. We can mobilize volunteers. We can inspire people to do better and be better. We don't need a business. We have created new products and businesses as a side effect. But I want to point out that as soon as you create a new product or a business, you also become part of the healthcare industry, and you become subject to institutional barriers, which are built precisely to keep institutions from ruining things. And so a non-institutional approach, which I think is particularly relevant to the kind of distributed maker community that we represent, is really something to pay attention to and to focus on at this particular moment. I want to point out that this particular moment has also forced us to realize that while sharing is caring, not caring is also sharing. It shares two terrible things. If you don't care and you don't wear a mask and you don't social distance, you spread, you share the virus. You also share an equally insidious disease, the disease of not caring. And we've seen in this crisis that the disease of non-caring can be fatal in the short term. And we're also seeing that we're in this pickle because the disease of not caring is fatal in the long term as well, which is to say the healthcare industry, which is a miracle of modern science and a pillar of civilization, and which will help us treat, cure, and understand the disease, ain't gonna do it anytime soon. Also, the healthcare industry, this is not a blanket condemnation, but it's a real warning, it profits from illness. And profit breeds inequality. And inequality breeds the illness. The present situation is a failure, not just of the medical system, but of our larger system. And furthermore, it's such a massive failure that we have an opportunity to rethink the larger system. That's why I've dragged the enable model into here. It's a different kind of model. It has done good. It's not a replacement for any of the things that we've come to rely on. But I want to urge us to think about getting useful stuff out there and not assume that funding or business is the be all, the end all, or even necessarily a requirement. So that's it. That's my sermon.
Wow, and a powerful sermon that was, really. I think there'll be some great aspects to consider there in terms of systems design, like you mentioned, and distributed models and volunteer-driven models. In part, you've already answered one of my questions, so I'm going to strike that one out. Next up, it's an absolute pleasure to be having John Gershenson from Cagenzi. John has been working with co-founder Ben Savanen to build a distributed manufacturing company that uses digital manufacturing to localize supply chains. They're focused on organizations that serve the public and have launched in Kenya. John has a PhD in mechanical engineering and has been a university professor, most recently a professor at Penn State Humanitarian Engineering and Social Entrepreneurship Program. In addition to Cagenzi, he has started one of other businesses in Kenya, such as a manufacturing bicycle, a service that manufactures bicycle accessories. He has over 15 years of experience in product and process design, consulting, and research in the bicycle, automotive, consumer goods, and heavy machinery industries. Thank you, John, for joining us today. Over to you.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I think it's pretty funny that you put me right after John as well. So we're coming at it from two different points of view. Cagenzi as well, though, is born from the maker movement. Absolutely, that's where our roots are. And I think anybody that comes from that that movement has to believe in open source as a general philosophy, most definitely. And while I come at it from a different perspective, I think I agree with 99% of what John just said. So let's see. So Cagenzi, what we do is we set up distributed digital manufacturing facilities, and then we link them with centralized engineering and centralized quality control. So what we do basically is give institutions and organizations the ability to get local the products and services that they actually need, whether it's spare parts, whether it's spare products, whatever they need in order to serve the people that they serve. So we always say, we don't help the people, we help the people who help the people. That's a little confusing, but that's our internal thing. So what we think we do is we are bringing greater access to global supply chain by bringing manufacturing to places where it normally wouldn't be. Obviously, digital manufacturing is relatively low cost compared to large scale mass manufacturing. And because we go with smaller manufacturing facilities, we distribute them in order to localize them, and then we centralize the quality control and the engineering to make that happen. So we set up our first, as Christina said, we set up our first hub in Kenya, in Kisumu, in Western Kenya. We've made, I don't know, that it just got set up in January, mid-January, fantastic timing. And then everything hit. And then we converted everything over to PPE and other sorts of products that make sense. I think we've put out in the last 5 weeks, maybe 3,000 units that we've supplied to people in the region where we are. Again, trying to stay as local as we possibly can. So whether it's spare parts for machines and equipment that they can't get, or products, that's kind of what we do. So let's see. So a couple points that I want to make, and it was much easier to go after John than before John, to tell you the truth. So we have the belief that we're kind of born from this idea that institutions and organizations and governments as well, and other companies, they were not able to get products from makers. They do require an element of quality assurance, of due diligence, of regulatory approvals, etc. So that's where we step in. Not that there's not a need for the other, but that's where we step in. They have to have those in place. We are firm believers in quality assurance through the entire design process, and most importantly, through the manufacturing. While you can have phenomenal designs, digital manufacturing really forces this idea where each product that comes off the line is potentially slightly different from the one that came off before it. And that's where we step in, is trying to maintain that quality assurance as we go in. So because we are a business, so we are a for-profit social business, absolutely. So we require funding in order to keep going. We have employees, we have a facility, and our idea is to scale those facilities all over. So we've had some investment funding, both local to East Africa and from the US. Myself and co-founder are US born, at least, and not based, but US born. One of the things that's really helped us get funding, I think, is collaborating with other organizations and institutions. There's a lot of fantastic people doing a lot of different things with a different spin. We're very big on let's not recreate the wheel. Where somebody else is excellent at it, let's bring in funding for them to continue to be excellent or be even more excellent at what they do. And maybe that can help what we do. For funding, though, what funding agencies are really looking for is what you're doing, is it real? Like, is it already up and running? This is not a time to be taking a huge risk on something that's not real, right? People need help, and in times, so you need proven results, I think. Is it sustainable? So are we just helping get X number of face shields to people, or are we creating something that has legs, it has a future? I think that's really important, and that's the message we tend to try to get out, is like, this is the beginning. I think it's really interesting, perhaps for a lot of us. All of a sudden I woke up, I've been trying to tell the story of what Kajenzi does, digital manufacturing, localization, all around the world, and nobody gets the story. And then all of a sudden I woke up one day and like everybody's aunt is telling stories about 3D printing face shields. And I don't have to tell the story, like everybody gets a story overnight. That's fantastic. But there's a really big difference between a person in their garage 3D printing a face shield and being able to do it through an approved facility, using approved designs, sanitization process that we use in order to deliver to hospitals, etc. So I think that's a key point. And always thinking about this idea, should we make it? Should we design it? And if we do, how do we deliver it? I think John brought up a really interesting point. You can't just deliver a product, you need to deliver a product wrapped in information, because products used incorrectly can be more dangerous sometimes, depending upon what the product is. Yeah, so I think one of the things that an organization such as ours does is we're able to decrease the risk of getting new manufacturing processes into place and new products into place for these institutions and organizations. Yeah, maybe that's it for now.
Wonderful, incredible story and experience. And it's important that the point that you make that, you know, you can be for profit. Of course, you can be for profit and have a value-centric approach. And this is why I think this panel is fantastic to show the breadth. Sometimes, depending on where you're registered, the only option is to go for profit. And that doesn't necessarily have to mean profit for profit's sake. In fact, financial sustainability should be at the center of how you devise your model, which could also be, in John's defense, be through the for-profit model as well. So I'm glad that we don't have to be binary in that perspective and really show the breadth of possibilities in terms of business models and funding opportunities. And it's this value-centric approach that it's a pleasure to invite in Kate Armstrong. Kate is the project lead at a wonderful project called Distributed Design Market Platform that's led over at the Fab Lab Barcelona IAC, the Institute for Advanced Architecture of Catalonia, where she's been articulating the community and communications of the Fab City Global Initiative. The Distributed Design Market Platform has been engaging cultural initiatives around Europe, I think with over 15 partners, exploring exactly the question about business models in different countries around Europe. So over to you, Kate. Thank you for joining us.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me. I'm actually really excited that I get to join the conversation today, because it's conversations like this that the distributed design platform actually is all about. So we're really developing a space for basically this kind of cultural necessity that comes with this new paradigm that we speak about, which is distributed manufacturing and design for that space. So the platform that I coordinate is a Creative Europe funded platform. It's part of the Creative Europe program of the European Union, and it's what we call a cascading platform. So we are the coordinators of a network of 15 other members, to be 17 next year. And this means that each of our members are working locally to deliver local events inside their makerspaces, cultural centers, cultural hubs that are all around the idea of progressing what distributed design is and can be. And one of the things that we're really interested in is what it means in terms of how makers actually scale products to a market or to potential markets, but also in what other skills makers and designers need to actually be able to compete and develop their own work and develop their products in that market. So it kind of obviously was born out of the maker movement. I think most of us here are from this world. And, you know, it was kind of looking at, well, what is coming out of the maker spaces, Fab Labs, Fab Academy, these kinds of programs in terms of design? And then how can we actually look at these to make them maybe more, you know, tech ready, or, you know, the societal readiness of these products? And how can we actually also articulate a whole space for those to exist inside the design field? So we run all sorts of events and activities to support makers and designers in this field. As I said, it's Europe-wide, so we run everything from, you know, Portugal, Lisbon to Iceland in the north. So we run a very wide range of different projects, and we get to see a lot of different practices and a lot of different evidences coming from the network, which is very interesting. And I think I'll probably focus most of what I talk about today around that, because I see that that can really be something that we can contribute to the conversation. But as I said, basically this field of what we are calling distributed design is coming with a whole breadth of parameters and different variables, which both Johns have talked about already. And I think that this is going to be something that's really key to the conversation today, is really that this is new in a way, you know, where we're really kind of testing and playing and prototyping, which we do well in the maker movement, to understand what this new space holds and how we can actually develop a space for makers and designers to work in what we like to call a post-industrial paradigm. So we kind of have this idea that, you know, this brings hyper customization, new aesthetics, new potentials for working, these kinds of kinds of elements to practice. And of course, it also brings new business models, new ways of making money, new skills that maybe we need. So yeah, all of this is involved in our work. So I'm going to open a huge can of worms here and say we're open to all conversations. But what we see a lot arising from the network is conversations around, well, if it's open source, how do I make money? How do I put food on my table? How do I pay my studio costs? How do I, keep up my website and these kinds of things? So I hope we can talk about that today, because I think it's really interesting, and those are the experiences of makers. And the other thing we see coming out of the network is that to be able to kind of fund projects, or to be able to find funding for projects, it's not just about having a great project. It's also about having the skills to talk about your project, having the skills to package your project. Maybe you need to be able to make some kind of communications or present or pitch your project. So I think the other thing is that the skills that are needed inside this field are very, very diverse. And sometimes it's about having those skills yourself, and other times it's about having the tools to collaborate with others, to be able to bring in a network and work in a networked fashion, so that you can have kind of a diverse set of skills around you to be able to do that. Yeah, so in terms of this inside COVID, we've had incredible response. We're kind of like John. We woke up one day, we're trying to tell people, yes, well, distributed design is X, Y, and Z, and then suddenly it's like, well, thank you very much. I know that it's a terrible thing, but in some ways, COVID can be a bit of a blessing. And this is one of those times, because yeah, suddenly, the work that our network was doing has been picked up by, Anne Hidalgo, the mayor of Paris, for example, is tweeting and talking about the work that's being done. So these kinds of things is very helpful, but I think it also opens up a lot of questions for the longevity of work in this field. How can we sustain this, and how can we build skills into our makers and designers to be able to sustain it? So I'm going to just maybe wrap it there, and then we can obviously discuss more after.
Lovely. Thank you, Kate. Really, really powerful perspectives. And here we also have another EU-funded project. It's going to be a fantastic question about the role of public funding, actually, especially maybe to see the kind of innovations that maybe is required here, right? In this case, an EU project called OpenNext, led by Robert Mies. Robert Mies studied industrial engineering with a specialization in mechanical engineering at the TU Berlin. During this time, he's also gained practical experience in Siemens for 3.5 years. And since 2016, he's been a research associate at the Department of Machine Tools and Factory Management at TU Berlin, and now leading OpenNext. The purpose of OpenNext is to share ideas and knowledge openly on digital platforms, so that together with the 19 projects EU-wide, we can establish new collaborations between companies and consumers to fundamentally change the way we create, produce, and distribute products. Thank you, Robert, for joining us today. Over to you.
Hi, can you hear me well? Perfect, okay. I'd actually like to thank you for the opportunity. I'm not going to speak freely, only because you contacted me 2 days ago, and I thought I'd make a quick presentation to run you through our ideas. So I just share my screen if that's okay. Share. All right, I think you can see my screen now. I'm just gonna go also on full screen. Yeah, you introduced the project very well already, so I don't have to say much about the project. Thank you. Just sharing a screen worked. Full screen is another thing altogether somehow right now. There's this button and that happens. Or this button. Right. So I'm actually here because we have a position on the funding with projects for COVID. In general, in terms of open source hardware, we feel that it would be great to have more funding. In fact, that's why I wanted to speak today. For open source hardware projects is also what we think. So we wrote open source hardware projects here as well. And there should be more business models. Let me just make this a bit smaller and put myself maybe up here or us. So the OpenNext project itself actually is running for 3 years. We just started last year, and yeah, we have 19 partners from 7 European countries, and Wikifactory is also part of it, which is great. The idea is that we want to facilitate collaborative product creation by companies and communities of consumers and makers through new mindset, new business models, new design processes, and new collaborative software solutions. So what you see here is maybe the project idea or the architecture. We think it starts in a way, it's a cycle, a continuous cycle how open source hardware products emerge. And it starts from engaging in these interesting processes that we see in this field. And we think that there could be a great chance to create a much more versatile open source development ecosystem and bring in also new players like SMEs. And we really see Fab Labs and makerspaces as the key actors here also that can bring this along. This is yeah, part of what we do in the project. Yeah, like you see here on this O, this is like an O that's open, like the open source hardware cork as well. The idea is also you need business models, you need an ICT infrastructure, you need to also think about prototyping of how to do it. In fact, you need to think about closing the physical virtual gap, and for that you need to think about a lot of challenges to overcome them at the moment. And let's say we're only at the start of this journey. So our project is trying to do something about that. But let me say more, I have to check the time. Let me say more in terms of 2 cases of where I think we could maybe see some elements of where we stand. So right now, can I move this a little? Yes, no, I can't move this. So right now we have one interesting project, which I'm just using for an example. I'm not gonna make any, let's say, marketing for it and say this is the best project that I see out there right now. But it's a project called Carola with a company here in Berlin called Micron, or their Berlin branch at least, and actually many others. Yeah, so I just put this here from all the partners I could see in the presentation. And the idea is to have scalable open source containerized mass production. So they want to produce containers, ship them to clients, or also for people to produce them themselves. And one container could produce a capacity of 3,000 masks per hour using non-woven fabrics in a 20-foot shipping container. So we know that a lot of investment went into that from some people who work in the project, especially from this company here. And they want to recover their investment, but so they have not published yet the documents completely for this container here. But they've actually completed the documentation almost. So yeah, they don't want to publish now before they have, of course, found a good business model about it. And one way could be crowdfunding. However, I mean, there are different organizations involved, like you see here, and there are different ways of how they could go. And if the crowdfunding is not a way, they're also thinking just simply as doing build to orders with clients. So the risk for the company is not so high. And actually, I just put the company here because we think that the company really enabled this this collaboration with their skills or with their resources. But the whole actually community here or network is important. So this is just one example where we see a company engaging and bringing in their skills. And this is a automized engineering service provider. Another example is what was just mentioned is that we see, this is case 2, we see that there are protection visors produced, in this case by Berlin Student Initiative originally. So there was a student, Paul Jerchel, at the Beuth Hochschule here in Berlin. And he had the idea to produce shields and protective shields. And yeah, so this information here I have from our good friends from Open Source Ecology Germany. they also update us on this project. And I find it quite interesting, and we could have used other initiatives all over Europe where we've seen this. But they're producing quite some output every day, 550 shields. They had a lot of donations, from what I was told, of injection molded mounting clips. So they're not trying to 3D print this. They have also found a good way of finding production resources. And you see a lot of partners here on the right. You see Kados, which is a Berlin nonprofit, actually shipping the masks. And you see the Beuth-Hochschule, where the idea came from. This is also interesting because I put some links here. I'll share this with you afterwards if there's any way to share this. Because especially in the second article here in the German Spiegel, which is a big magazine, actually they argue that from the project actually that there should be structural funding. We also believe so. There needs to be more structural funding. It's quite unfortunate that it's so difficult for open source hardware projects to get funding. We also see at the same time that the business model question is a question here. And we see that you need to have a general business model. This is my last slide, I think, that I prepared, yes. So we're thinking along the lines of actually promoting more funding, at least for now, yeah. If you have a stable business model, that's great. And we see here different avenues. But one important avenue is also, and I think I'm going over time now, but I'm just going to say a bit more about standardization, that you need to be able to prove something at the end of the day if you want to get funding. So we're working together with our colleagues to promote open source hardware standardization. And one project I want to tell you about is the DIN-Spec 3105 project, which is coordinated by the Open Source Ecology Germany e.V. Again. And we're working closely with them to, this will come out in June soon. It's a publicly available specification which supports the requirements for explains the requirements for documentation, and also the assessment of, it allows the assessment of openness of open source hardware. So it specifies a whole procedure for that. And this is with the Dean. The Dean supported us here to make this project happen. But also we think that the IEEE might be an interesting standardization body to be the home of new standards. So there's a preprint out there, which I will also share with these slides from Jeremy Bonmaison and his team, who we work with together also in the Open Next project. And they argue that, there could be more initiative from the Dean and the IEEE, for example, to host open source hardware community initiatives. Having said that, here's just some general information about our project. What's our position on business model and funding? I hope is clear a little bit from the position I took here. To say to the previous speakers, maybe we are not as radical, maybe in terms of our ideas here. We're just showing you different cases. If I compare to the first speaker, John, and then. But I think bringing more professional players into the field here as well is also important, because closing the virtual physical gap is something that we have in open hardware and we don't have in open source software. So yeah, these are my closing words, and I think now we should really start discussing.
Thank you, Robert. That was really rich in case studies. Really impressive. I too am a big fan of what Carola and all the case studies you brought to the table have been doing. During this time when you were all giving your presentations, we released the first poll. The first poll that asked, what do you think the average cost saving for funding the manufacturing of an open source COVID-19 product versus the cost to produce on the market? And I wanted to share with you really briefly, which will continue on to the question, that a ventilator on the market costs around $7,000. And you can make it in India, perhaps, for one made in India would be perhaps around $1,700. But an open source one can cost as little as $8. I think this speaks to the reality of John Scholl as well, with how you've disrupted the market of prosthetics that normally, well, not only would they not be customized, they'd be at the range of $2,500, $3,000, and you you give it for free. But even if a maker were to justify the costs are around $100 to even as low as $25. I've done one myself in the past, which is incredible. But there's an aspect of, indeed, costs of accreditation, costs of standardization, which is the topic of this next poll that I would like to bring to the attention of those here. Who should cover the cost of getting products internationally audited and nationally accredited for the local distribution where they are needed? John, I have a feeling that, you know, you could feed into this because you yourself said that you centralized that process in Kujenzi. Or the cost.
Yeah. Right. So we're taking on the burden of doing that. I mean, I think that's our job, is to take on the burden of doing that for our designs, and it's expensive. It consumes much of the people that are working with us, the development and the and getting things through to the regulatory process. But you know, I think you mentioned ventilators and similar sorts of products, and yeah, you could get them for whatever that low price is. They can be made. Will it work? Will each individual one of them always work? Will they work as long as the other ones? Will doctors and nurses know how to use them? If they break, are there spare parts for them? How do you keep them operating at the proper efficiency and all dialed in? I think those are big questions, and large companies have worked for decades on trying to figure that out for ventilators. I think I want to know where my ventilator comes from a little bit. Well, with all my products. But yeah, so I think that there's that element. That being said, if I am sick, okay, like if I need a ventilator and I need it now, I really hope that there is somebody next door to me that is able to make a ventilator as my last ditch effort in order to help me get through that. I think those are two really different problems. One is just an extremely hyper-local sort of last ditch solution. And I don't mean to bring up ventilators as a particular problem, but just in general, that's where regulatory issues kind of set in.
I can see John Shaw raising his hand, wanting to speak of his experience. John, what do you have to say?
I just wanted to reinforce what John is saying. I came in to stake out a position, but John just listed all of Enable's weaknesses. They are true weaknesses, and they're problems we have not solved. So I just want to acknowledge that. I'm actually very interested and very excited in the things that are doing, and they're an important complement to the things that we do. I do have a phrase that I have found quite useful, which relates to John's second point about, in case of emergency, if there is something that is, here's the quote, substantially better than nothing, for God's sake, hope that it's widely available. I think that the maker community in particular needs to recognize that they can produce things that are substantially better than nothing. And there are a lot of people for whom nothing is the norm. And in that context, holding back because it's not up to your highest standards is actually failing to help people. So it's a dynamic, context relevant judgment that needs to be made, but it is a judgment that needs to be made.
I agree with you, John, and to a certain extent, I would like to cue in Robert here, because part of what I understand OpenNext is trying to achieve here is that there is ways to, let's say, distribute the accreditation, or at least enable the design to manufacturing process to be somewhat more software enabled, more internet enabled. In the same way that we crowdsource our designs, we could be crowdsourcing our peer review process. Aspects of, the design to manufacturing process could include a simulation component that could be doing a lot of the tests. I think there's an aspect here that, technology will save us, or rather, we need a fund for an infrastructure to be developed. Robert, what do you have to say about that?
Yeah, so all these are potential avenues, first of all. Actually, I'd like to link in also with John and John. I think actually Enable is interesting also as a case, because Enable shows that matchmaking is hugely important. Yeah, and I think if we look along the value chain, yeah, of how a product really, yeah, traditionally finds its way into the market. We are looking at it more from an engineering perspective, but then of course also from a business perspective. But from an engineering perspective, you need to reach out to people who also have the knowledge on testing. Of course, we could try and figure some things out in terms of virtual tools that help us early to front load the process. But I mean, just like I showed also with the example of the Micron people, so to have engineering service providers, to have manufacturing businesses, to have vendor platforms, so distributions, third-party service providers, testing labs, and really all sorts of other players involved, and then have a good matchmaking process like in the Enable. I think that's the interesting chance here. And like I said, in the Micron case, they started investing, and they will potentially still find a way to recover their investments the way they usually do. But they're now trying a different thing here, and I think there's a real chance there.
Great, Robert. And I will be so forward to say that there's a little bit of an elephant in the room, I believe, when it comes to distributed design, even of just simpler objects that I'm going to cue in Kate in, because you know, the idea of distributing a design right now isn't quite viable if you aren't working with the same machines, with the exact same materials. There's still a lot to learn. And this is where I love what distributed design has been doing from a cultural perspective, and even engaging designers with this vision of, you know, you could be designing products that are made locally around Europe. And you've been doing a lot of programs with different designers to bring them on board with this. Kate, I'd love to hear your perspective and what you can add to this.
Yeah, the first thing I think I'll just add to what we were speaking about before is that one thing we're talking about here is the diversification of supply chain and the diversification of supply. And I think that there's one really super interesting thing that we see in designers who are now graduating, or designers who have graduated in the past 5 years, is that we actually see that designers and makers are looking for opportunities and potential opportunities in very diverse fields within this new paradigm, let's call it. So some of these designers will be skilled enough to go and work in, you know, really specific component-based designs in one field, and others will design their own responses to be prototyped in a fab lab and, you know, maybe scaled up to a small scale or batch production. So I think the other thing that's happening is that, you know, one of the biggest issues that has happened in the last few months is that we have a centralized reliance for the supply of medical equipment. You know, this is one space we get all of these very diverse range of needs, you know. So if, for example, we had a space in which maybe, you know, the top very specialized 30% of the design could be registered in a specific way and certified in a specific way, and maybe 70% has a different kind of, you know, different kind of way of actually certifying them, we can actually allow people, designers also, to design for different needs and different kind of functionalities within that wider kind of diversified supply chain. And I think the other thing about this is that, you know, sometimes we forget that common sense is something that designers use all the time, and it's a certification of its own. And I think that we also need to empower designers to be able to also understand that all these certifications and all these ways of working is part of their practice. You know, sometimes I think that once, you know, I was studying design, you know, when the best you could do was have something mass produced, you know, so it was like, how many units are you going to create of this? This is amazing. But if we can help designers to understand that, well, actually, the idea is to do this so that it meets the needs, it meets specific needs, and it really is providing for what the market is asking, then the level of certification can maybe be twisted or changed to be something that is not so much about standardized certification, but maybe it's a certification for a certain space or time or need or what have you. The interesting thing is that what we experience and what I think we've all experienced is that, you know, we talk about something that is really utopian in a way. You know, this is a super nice idea, but it's so complex. I mean, the actual ability to share a design is really complex. We have one of our really close collaborators that is involved in the platform, and he always says, yeah, but if, you know, when I share that design, and I want to share that design, I want to be able to open source everything that I do, but how do I know that the next iteration of that design is going to do what it is that I designed it to do? So it's really difficult to actually help designers to understand what those processes are and how you can design for open source, for example, how you can design component-based design, how you can design against variables, how you can design to allow some level of customization of your design once you release it into the free world. So I think this is really interesting in that there is a whole lot of capacity that we need to build into this field so that the vast complexities are also taken on by the designers themselves and makers and all the other people who fit this, because we talk about designers, but actually we're also talking about just everyday people in their living rooms these days, and that's fantastic, you know, citizen designers as well.
Thank you, Kate. And I see, Agustin, I kind of have to plug you in here as our designer in residence, because I guess complex need not mean complicated. And where it is complex, it can be computationally or technically resolved. But Agustin is maybe one of the makers out there that has best, let's say, optimize a 3D printer to, you know, print with just a simple desktop 3D printer, some pretty immaculate outputs. Agustin, as a designer, how do you consider aspects of, standards and quality control throughout your product development process?
Well, I come from a graphic design background, just for everyone to know. And in fact, I'm a DDMP member in some sort of way, because I participated in a bootcamp and in their summer school. And it wasn't until, let's say, 2 or 3 years ago that I realized the importance of quality control, of guaranteing that things are going to work, especially if we are talking about medical devices or open source hardware. So in the end, there's a boring part behind every design project that, as many students don't really think about it, like obsolescence. But in the end, it's in these hard moments that we really need to think that that's the important part. It's not fun, but it's necessary. And DDMP, for example, showed me how important sharing and receiving feedback is during the product development process. And for example, I followed the Enable initiative for years. In fact, I got into 3D printing saying I want to 3D print prostheses, and I haven't done it yet, but I support all the initiatives that are related to it, and that's the way to go. It's really inspiring. So yeah, that's it. Not sure if I answered the question here.
I share that same feeling of inspiration, though, Agustin. Thank you. I wanted to bring to the table a debate around open source and business models. Robert, you brought the point that it's difficult to fund open source. And I think to open source software and actually what a success it has been. What can we learn from the business models, to which there are many, behind open source software?
Okay, So can we learn from software business models for hardware? I guess the question of business models, I'd have to share my own perspective on it, because we don't really completely have one like that yet. To say that we can learn from it, surely, because there are interesting models, like also having some things open, some things closed. We find that it's a question also, how open do you want to be in a project? It's not everything is open at any point in a process, or also as an output. And but first of all, I think there needs to be a clear approach that you think about your goals, you think about the partners you want to engage, and then you think about why you would want to make something open, and then making something open is actually really hard work. And having a business model in the first place, if you're one of the partners being involved, is likely going to be also a stabilizing factor, and then building your business model around a community is even better, because that means you're already doing something, you're already being rewarded through some sort of industry because of some good work you're doing. And then if you're part of this initiative and you expand your business model, you could create new opportunities that you didn't have before. But at the same time, I also fully appreciate that we have many people here on the Wikifactory page who are starting maybe projects from scratch and who are not necessarily indulging in, let's say, a huge network with manufacturing companies. So we also have to, of course, see that open hardware projects then have to pretty much quickly think about entrepreneurship issues. If I want to run a business now, or just want to source material, actually, you start getting into the tricky part of, okay, now if I create a company, for example, I need a business model. And that's to be honest, something I'm not so sure I can give much advice right now, even from software, that, oh, how do you tackle being an open source project and all the new things you have to tackle there? And how do you tackle then coming up with a new business model? That's let's say a difficult thing. Maybe I'd also like to suggest one thing as a way out right now, because Kate, you said with your project Distributed Design Markets that you really see distributed approaches, and I think maybe the one thing in terms of business models that's different from any other let's say literature that we see so far here is that we really need to look into distributed approaches. If we don't have distributed approaches, if we have the centralized models, there's soon going to be one distribution platform. If we think ahead, that's probably Amazon. And I think most of us don't mind buying something from Amazon, but clearly there are some damning consequences of that. Yeah. So I think also thinking about distributed, localized business models. Yeah, that's another issue which I think, or another solution which I think is really rich.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also on the point of the distributed, I mean, we can also think about the idea of, a distributed certification, these kinds of things where we actually understand what decentralization and distribution really could mean for this kind of thing. I actually wanted to say in the poll that you put up international and national, and my answer to that would be, why can't it be local? Why can't we have the situation where we have, for example, with kitchens, kitchens, they have a health inspector come through and check that the kitchen is certified for use and certified to serve food to a public. Could we have a similar thing for a makerspace, a batch production facility, or a flexible factory at a local level? I mean, I think these are the questions that, while we have Amazon in the back of our ear telling us that they can provide for us all of the necessities that we see online, we're kind of got our blinkers on to the potential that we have to enable an entire generation of designers to actually force this to happen. Because this is the other thing that I think is really relevant, is that designers are not necessarily the ones who need to come up with the business models. We can't suggest that a designer or a maker not only, prints 3,000 PPE when there's a situation, raises the funds to be able to do that, also does all of their own kind of, production and all their own website, and also, can also design a new business model for them to actually keep their head above water. I really think that this is, it takes a village. And I think this is why something like Open Next is so important, because we need really the capacity of the market to be providing opportunities that our designers are able to take up. And then we need some way to actually also be ensuring that there's an education level, or there's a way in which we can build the capacity of designers to, as you can say, design for open source, because that is not easy. That's a whole nother thing, and I certainly wasn't taught to do that in design school. So I hope that, there are people doing it more now. You have things like Fab Academy and you have different ways of learning, but I think that this is really important, is to build this kind of structural capacity around this field.
Such excellent contributions. And, you bring to my mind the maybe strict difference when it comes to software and say product design and fabrication, that one is entirely virtual, albeit the bits and the servers, and one is actually a physical process where there's a value added generation process in place. And I have a question to John, because to both Johns actually, because, you know, I highly appreciate that an open source design makes it possible to have an open source community from an economics point of view, to be able to serve those who typically in a market of a product are underserved, who wouldn't be able to purchase the bionic super hands that are on the market. And therefore, if you can provide a free product because the person, the maker, is assuming the cost of production and of assembly. But then with open source design compared to software, there is indeed a value added process of production, and that should incur a natural fee. So of course, if someone would want something shipped to them flat packed, they should still pay for the production cost and the shipping cost. And if someone wants, you know, you pay for the convenience. If someone wants a product not only fabricated and assembled and brought to their homes, well, there's different layers of value added fees that would be incurred. And then additionally, because the beauty of digital fabrication is that customization is nearly free. So you can actually offer the additional benefit of a custom product to your exact needs at an additional premium. John, do you feel like this, how do you integrate this value added of custom to your products? Is this how you relay the value added or the benefit of distributed manufacturing at the local level when you're supplying some of your products on the ground?
Yeah. There we go.
Sorry,
Yeah.
John Gershon, then first.
Yeah, sorry,
okay, good.
Yeah, so I think, but it's also not, it's not just like, I think you hinted at it a little bit. It's not just the ability for people to purchase when they may not be able to purchase. It's also what they're able to purchase. So it's this idea of making locally appropriate products to really give people access to a piece of the supply chain that doesn't exist. You know, so for instance, one of the things that we do with spare parts is typically spare parts for machines are available in large modules or subassemblies. And what we do is we break it down to the component level so that people can get exactly what they need without having to pay the extra whatever for all of the stuff that they really don't need in order to fix it. I think that's just kind of one example. But I loved how you were talking about this idea of you get what you pay for to some degree. What value added layers do you want to put on top? So do you care that your product is to somehow has passed through a regulatory process? So if we're talking about download software, will you download software made by like just Joe anybody and then download it to your laptop comfortably? Like, or perhaps, depends what it does, or perhaps do you need some level of security that where it came from has either some sort of certification, maybe that's done by, is done by distributed design or something like that. But already every time you add that layer of certification from distributed design, it's a little less open now, right? Somebody had to have earned a badge somehow. And with each step, we make it a little bit open. And I think for us as a company, we would love to be able to feed stuff back into this open source as well. We do worry, of course, how people will use it, but I think that is our duty to feed things back in as well to it, I think, yeah. So how do you, and then the other piece is certifying the facility itself. So, do I know that it's going to be manufactured in a place where everything that comes out of there is basically the exact same? Can I trust it? I'm using certification and trust kind of interchangeably. But there are, so it is a beginning, our facility has been approved for manufacturing, not just designs, but manufacturing facilities, digital manufacturing facilities are now being approved by regulatory bodies.
Thank you, John. And I think that cues up really nicely for John the second on the role that his platform that he's built for Enable, for this matchmaking on a trust-based model to broker these kind of connections. So someone who is in need can connect with someone who can do the supply and the fabrication for that person in need.
Right. I have no uniform answer to your question about where additional layers of value get associated with additional costs. The truth is the match that gets made, the volunteer and the recipient work it out, and hopefully the device gets to the person who needs it at a price they can afford, often for free, because frankly, the rewards for the creator on this small bore model are comparable to the rewards for the recipient, right? The recipient is getting something that helps them with their life and livelihood. The maker gets a really purposeful mission that they feel great about. And in that context, frankly, the amount of money it costs to mail the object is typically, in low volume, not a deterrent. But every possibility does happen. Customization is an example of something where the distributed volunteer community is actually very helpful, because each person can do one thing for one person, and you get the customization. Shipping is a bigger problem than customization, but as I say, it's an example of something that we would love to have a general solution for. We don't. Just on that point, I do want to observe that the other panelists are all filling a really valuable niche, which is trying to think about institutional mechanisms for supporting what in our case, and in many cases, are potentially non-institutional projects, sort of adding structure without turning all of these various projects into non-open source, proprietary, necessarily for profit. I have the impression, I just want to say, that the EU is more enlightened about this, and especially in comparison to the current political climate in my own country, which I regret. And I just want to point out, though, that the United States has contributed and has a lot to contribute, and it would be a really nice thing if the EU agencies recognized that their money can do a lot of good for Europe and the world by tying into and complementing what's going on in the States for the States. I think, frankly, the EU, I envy the EU ecosystem, but I will complain that it's actually being a little parochial in not trying to spread their enlightened practices outside of the EU. And our operators are waiting for your call. That's my real point.
I'll say one thing, John, that we're really lucky to be connected to the Fab Lab network. So obviously based out of Boston, and very obviously very much a part of the American or the US setup. So I think that that's something that we really love, being able to be so connected to the way that they work. And we use the Fab Labs IO platform to really also understand how we can map and kind of scope that impact that we have. But I think you're right. And you know what? I think we really thankful to be able to run a project like this, because I know that, you know, this in terms of a cultural project and developing cultural need, this is not something that is necessarily, you know, traditionally thought of as culture. And for me to try to understand how we can program things like, you know, awards and summer schools and conferences and exhibitions around this idea, for me, it's crucial to be able to move forward in the field of design and the field of general culture as it is. So I think, I think you're right. I mean, obviously running the project, I have to be an evangelist, but yeah, I think you're totally right. And I do think that there's a lot of space to branch some of the best practices that we're developing to other areas in bilateral or you know, other ways of sharing the knowledge, for sure.
Tying it back to funding a little bit and echoing some of the things that John said in terms of the jealousy of from where I originate compared to the EU. It is nice to see EU and its member countries being much faster to spread the funding, specifically in East Africa, where I tend to operate out of. It's been really nice that the funding has opened up there first, and it's been real catalytic funding, not just like funding that's going to go, you know, let's give whatever $100 million to one particular county or one particular government, wherever it might be, but it's all of these catalytic funds that are opening up, that are coming from the EU. I think it really is important in order to jog things, to create things, to create whatever this new reality is going to be. And it's been really important for us, I will say, and it's exciting to see. And I would really like to see more foundations, more organizations, more governments have that eye towards the sort of things that I think all four of us are doing, where we're trying to light fires under different elements that we all know should exist, but they don't exist at scale yet. And we need to catalyze, whether it's the education, whether it's that design community and that interaction and that openness between it, whether it's engaging the makers to actually do the making, or as I said originally with Kate, with like, what does it mean to be a maker, and how do you grow from being a maker to something that has impact, to what we do, which is like, how do you now take that and then how do you scale it from a manufacturing standpoint? These are things that need to get funded, most definitely. And perhaps the problem is that the four of us have never put in for a single grant altogether, right? Maybe it's not our individual pieces, and as well the 20 however many participants. Maybe what it is it's not about our individual pieces, it's about what does the picture look like for the greater whole, and how do we put that all together, and then somebody will be willing to open up for that, maybe.
And John, maybe the time is now, because we've all had our work so validated in the last two months. And I think that you know, the fact we said it, you wake up and suddenly everybody knows what you're doing. But I think that this is also, you know, something that has really validated what it is that a maker and a distributed ecosystem and all these kinds of things can have the potential to do. It's kind of like a trial run for what's coming, you know, and we really see it as this. We really see that the systems collapse is, you know, impending, and how do you actually, you know, have the learnings of the last 2 months to feed something more long term.
Yeah, I would agree. I think this is the moment. You know, all of a sudden we woke up and, you know, the geeky kids are cool all of a sudden, right? Like, how did that happen, right?
And not a moment too soon.
I actually want to just reshift the focus a little bit of the debate, because there's, John, you mentioned precisely that the EU is taking a great interest in these new initiatives, and they're also funding a lot of great new initiatives, and the distributed design markets project was also one of the projects that I think we built on, by the way. So we see however, also some challenges. So if you look at what's going on in the US and what is going on in the EU, quite generally, the differences are only slight. And over the long run, maybe, I mean, what's going on right now with your government is a totally different thing altogether. I'm not trying to say that, but the differences are slight in terms of overall outlook. If we had a conference in Bath hosted by my colleague Jeremy Beaumaison and co-hosted, and they try to carve out a strategy for science, an open hardware strategy for science, in fact. And there were a lot of people in the room who were saying, yes, we have all these projects that we're doing, but actually, quite frankly, we're not sharing our results. there's not a lot of uptake by many businesses of these results. And this goes for a lot of funding that's basically, I don't want to say go down the drain, because I see how science still has many impacts, but it could be more, it could be much more valuable if we took the funding and we said, okay, it has to be for public benefit. Yeah. And that's why funding for open hardware, yeah, not just in science, by the way, it's just an example from this was a February workshop in February. It was an international workshop. We were invited. One of our guys also went, and we participated. And yeah, there are some problems there. And Kate, you mentioned we need to think about certification, for example. Yeah. Right now, all of this is not really mandated by or validated, yeah, by many institutions, yeah. What we're talking here about, yeah. Many institutions don't even have an idea that there could be a great potential out there, yeah. So I just wanted to also give that perspective from what we're trying to do and what I see, yeah. But yeah, and not trying to contradict the previous points. Yeah.
No, I understand. I feel better knowing that things aren't that much better over there, sadly.
Yeah. Yeah.
That said, I think we're on to something, because for sure, I've actually just shared a live resource list that I'm sharing on VAR Response about different funding opportunities and open calls. I think we need to actually do something about it. And dare I bring in a quote from Kenya, that if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. So I think there's an opportunity here to solve these complex but not complicated problems together. I look forward to following up on this point. I think it's clear that next session on accreditation and legal aspects is quite an important topic to continue having. I really liked how it was one of the focus of today's debate. But first of all, last of all, I just want to say thank you to everyone who's been here as participant, and especially to all of you as panelists. Your contributions to today's debate has been excellent. I really appreciate everyone's contribution. Thank you so much for having joined us, and keep well, keep safe, and I hope we can engage with you moving forward.
Thank you.
Any last remarks? Over to you.
I have a super quick remark, and it's a plug, because we will soon be announcing the opening of the Distributed Design Award for this year, which is the 2020 award. And there also includes in this some seed funding for projects of excellence, and also some capacity building, kind of networking and business mentoring as prizes, including one from our wonderful friends at Wikifactory. So bit of a plug, but if anybody is in the audience and is an attendee and wants any more information or anything, you can keep up with that being announced very soon. So we're super excited, and we hope that we can support an amazing project, maybe from the response of the last 2 months.
Great.
Excellent, a very worthwhile plug. Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Thank you, Christina. Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Thank you, everyone. And
thanks all. Keep safe.
See you around.
Stay safe.